Thank you very much, kind senators. This evening, we have with us the Honourable Steven McKinnon, Minister of Transport. Welcome, Minister. Welcome this evening. And he is joined by officials. Please forgive my pronunciation. I should have practiced. Department of Transport then. Arun Trangaraj, Deputy Minister. Luis Miguel Izquierdo Martin, Acting Assistant Deputy Minister, High-Speed Rail, Major Projects. You know that's what we'll be putting our questions about. And Nicholas Robinson, who is the Associate Deputy Minister, Safety and Security. And Minister, I believe you have an opening statement for 5 minutes, please, and then we will move into questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Honourable Senators. This is my first visit as a Minister of Transport, Transportation then, and it's an honour to be here. I greatly appreciate having this opportunity to speak about the high-speed rail network as part of your study of Bill C-15, the Budget Implementation Act. Today, Canada faces extraordinary threats to its economy. The Prime Minister has been very clear in describing the juncture that we are currently experiencing as a turning point. We need a Team Canada approach to protect our economy now and position ourselves for a future that will be marked by a profound transformation of the world order.
Ambitious nation-building projects that have shaped our country and delivered prosperity and economic opportunities for generations of Canadians. Like the other nation-building projects of our past, such as the St. Lawrence Seaway and the Confederation Bridge, the high-speed rail network will be a testament to the greatness and potential of Canadian innovation and ingenuity. The high-speed rail network should be understood as the beginning of a transformation. This generational project won't just connect 18 million Canadians or cut travel times in half. It will also create over 50,000 jobs, contribute $35 billion to our economy, and reduce emissions equivalent to removing 100,000 cars from our roads. Following our Buy Canada principles, high-speed rail could source several 100,000 tons of Canadian steel, lumber, and concrete while employing local businesses along the route. Let me be clear. This project will create an industrial demand not seen in a generation. However, to build a project as ambitious as this, we must take every necessary measure to build it the right way. To do so, it requires ongoing and meaningful consultation, clarity and certainty for local communities, measures to reduce impacts on potentially affected landowners, robust environmental assessments, and a modernized and consistent regulatory regime. This can only be achieved through what the High-Speed Rail Network Act delivers. This act is the result of our engagement with the provinces of Quebec and Ontario. Its measures draw directly from and align Canada with the well-established and effective infrastructure legislation in both of these provinces. This includes Ontario's Building Transit Faster Act 2020 and Quebec's Act respecting expropriation. This act aligns its measures with the provinces so that we can cut red tape and provide greater clarity and certainty around the regulatory regime while eliminating costly, duplicative processes. It also helps prevent delays, provide predictable project timelines, and increase project efficiency. It will better support consultation, efficient and timely communication with landowners, ensure impact and environmental assessments are conducted for each project segment, and enshrines the Official Languages Act into the operations of Canada's high-speed rail network. This legislation also reiterates how a meaningful and respectful relationship between the Crown and Indigenous peoples are fundamental to advancing reconciliation and completing this project. Cet engagement comprend une mobilisation.
This commitment includes early, meaningful, and ongoing engagement and consultation while affirming that Indigenous knowledge shared in confidence will be protected. As this is the largest and most complex infrastructure project in a generation, consultation with local communities is essential. The first round of consultations led by Alto has already begun in communities along the rail corridor, and more than 26,000 people have submitted comments through the online portal. Consultations will continue and will be a key part of the impact assessment process made possible by this legislation. The project aims to impact individual landowners as little as possible, whilst acknowledging the reality of building a rail network as large and complex as this one. As well, we will continue to collaborate productively with our provincial partners during the development phase and into construction. Recently, I was extremely proud to announce the first section of this project to connect Montreal and Ottawa. It is expected to begin construction in just 4 years if this legislation is passed.
Canada's future, connecting communities, creating tens of thousands of jobs, and driving enormous economic growth. Our country cannot afford to miss this opportunity. Avec ça, Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much, Honourable Minister. First question.
Being here. Look, could you just explain to us the rationale for the process that you're using for the high-speed rail project? Because witnesses so far have told us, like, there's no cost estimate, there's no engineering, there's no route selected, and that the bill, I'd expected the bill to talk something about, like, the mandate of the corporation, but it's focused mostly on expropriation. So what's out there now? Like, there's not much information on the project itself, and there's 2 routes being not proposed, but, you know, decisions going to be made on 1 of 2 routes. So it seems like everybody's stirred up, but there's no groundwork done. Like, I would have expected to see, you know, a better cost estimate, you know, some engineering work, a little bit more information up front before you stirred up all those people. So can you just, like, elaborate on why it seemed like the process is almost backward, but there must have been a rationale for it. Can you just explain why you're doing it this way?
Thank you, Senator. A very good question. This is an expropriation provision. This is a land acquisition provision. One of the key features or one of the key steps in building infrastructure at this scale is speed, such that if we are able to save time in the advanced planning process, we can save some estimates, $5 billion a year in construction costs. So the mandate that I have is to reduce the planning time. We are in the planning process from 8 to 4 years. The only way to do that is to shorten a number of the steps, land acquisition being a very, very important one of those steps. We are actually not consulting on 2 different routes, as your question seemed to imply. There is a segment between Peterborough and Ottawa where 2 options are being consulted upon. But the route, the corridor, what we call the corridor, which is a 10-kilometer wide stretch between Quebec City and Toronto, has been identified. But that will be reduced to a 60-meter wide, maximum 60 meters, in some cases less, wide alignment when the final alignment decision is made. The reason why we can't come, we have given rough order of magnitude estimates with respect to the cost of this infrastructure. The reason why we cannot be more precise is that there is, until we do pick the actual alignment, that we know how much, for example, public land, rights of way and so on, we are able to use. That'd be one example, but geology would be another example. Station locations would be another example. There are a number of variables that the corporation is currently evaluating right now that will all have major impacts on the final project cost.
You know, the estimate that's out there now is not, I wouldn't say it's reliable. And you're talking about, you know, a shortcut to reduce from 8 years to 4 years. Don't you think like there's a risk to all that? I mean, the estimate might come in at $200 billion. Or, you know, if you're going to shorten the time frame to 4 years, you're going to cut corners. Like, is there some sort of risk assessment done on all that?
We're not going to cut corners. In fact, I would argue that the direction, certainly, that I've given, that Alto is following, is to use actual tried and true processes. And you will have heard me just mention how we've been inspired by expropriation regimes that were put in place in both Quebec and Ontario. One pour mes amis du Québec qui a mené à la construction du réseau express.
Les Amis du Québec, which led to the Metropolitan Express line in an accelerated fashion. And I think that speaking to the people who are responsible for that infrastructure would inform you as to how essential this step is to such a project.
The Disaster Act is a tried and true piece of legislation that has shortened these timelines. I'll go one step further, Senator. Yeah, we don't have much process in Canada. There's rarely a process that is perfectly long. They can all be shortened, Senator.
Merci.
Thank you, Senator Forêt. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Honourable Minister, for being here among us. Perhaps heading down that same line of thought, what I've seen in figures are preliminary estimates between 60 and 70 billion. So that gives a bit of a margin. So how were those estimates drawn up? We understand that, of course, as the project goes forward and that expropriation goes forward, and based on the topography of the land base, you know, the challenges will become clearer. But to start from 60 to $90 billion, rather, not 70, how was this evaluated? By kilometre, by segment? Honourable Senator, we are able to consider such projects elsewhere in the world and establish an estimate based on length of a linear project such as this one. Moreover, based on the cost of the technologies to be used, the materials as well. Thus, this estimate really is based on tried and true processes, rules of art, if you wish, at this stage, for a process that will be far longer, broader, and exhaustive in depth, for which the results will be communicated to the Parliament of Canada. Of course, the Parliament shall be called upon to approve the investments as we go forward. And this committee as well as part of that process. So you can certainly expect my returning here to you, as you should wish, as we go forward. And as the engineering goes forward, the supplies, the acquisition of land, all variables that will help us provide a clearer estimate. What I can state is that unless we shorten the processes and shorten the length of time, it's not a realistic project. For such a long time now, we have spoken of a high-speed rail process here in Canada. People don't believe it's even possible. That's how long we've been talking about it. So we want to make this real. We want to make it something people can actually see happening within 4 years. After 5, 6, 7 years, people start to consider it to be like an abstract hope more than a project. And of course, delays cost so much. The types of teams that we now have working on this project, a private consortia, also supporting us. These costs are overhead for as long as planning is underway. And if we can shorten that part of the project, we will have really been able to give taxpayers an enormous gift. So we've never been in greater need of collective transport services, considering rail services as they are now. Air Canada isn't even servicing Montjoly anymore. What has already been spent on the project? I understand that there are expropriation and topography costs, but Alto, have they already spent directly on carrying out the project? Alto, I could get back to you with the actual figure. About $5 billion for the planning and phase and beginning of carrying out the project that they're now engaged in, if I'm not mistaken, but I'll get back to you with that. Have I more time? 1 minute. You have said 4.9. I've just been told 4.9. You 1.9? No, sorry, 4.9. Out of 5 billion? No, 4.9 already engaged for the planning period. All right, 1 minute. You said earlier that you are taking into account Indigenous knowledge within the framework of this project. So when it comes to agreements, are there mediation processes foreseen? Have we already set out with Indigenous partners what the mediation platforms or processes would be if there's disagreement? Working at all levels, we are integrating Indigenous partners. What I am told is that everything is going forward very nicely. There are agreements already come to. I point out that we are not crossing any reserve land. So that can be taken for granted. Perhaps in areas where there are claims, but we are certainly not crossing any reserve land. And we have an undertaking to work in partnership with Indigenous peoples, and that seems to be quite solid. Thank you very much, Senator Forte. Senator Cardozo. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senate here for this hearing. I also want to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Thangaraj for his service to transport and wish you the best as you go off to global affairs. This is finance. We'll find a way to get you back here, I'm sure. But, Minister, as a senator from Ottawa, I'm a big supporter of this project. I think it'll be good for Ottawa. I think Ottawa needs a boost, and this is one of the ways I think it can get the kind of boost it needs. I have some concerns. I want to share with you concerns that we've been hearing, and of course you've been hearing, from residents along the way. The concern about expropriation. And one of my concerns is that the way the debate is playing out is sort of pitting rural residents against big city residents. And you as a government need to be aware of that and be concerned about that kind of division that can happen. How do you make sure that Alto conducts itself properly in terms of the consultations and awards people the proper amounts when they're expropriating land? Because with this bill, we're kind of giving them a bit of a free pass, a bit of a fast track. How do you make sure people the rural residents are treated fairly?
Well, thank you, Senator. And I need to, je suis désolé, Senator Forêt, je veux corriger.
I'm very sorry, Senator Forêt. I wish to correct myself. I had misunderstood out of the left eye. It's actually 3.9 billion. All right, that's still quite a lot of money. But I just want to be quite clear, of course. This is the Finance Committee. I'm really sorry.
Not go any longer than it had to, though. Very good question. Thank you very much. And indeed, moi je représente la capitale nationale.
I represent the national capital.
That people in Gatineau, as I call it, Gatineau, Ottawa, about this project. First, your first observation on land acquisition. We will always attempt to negotiate respectfully with on a willing buyer, willing seller basis with all landowners. I need to also reiterate, because it's very important that everyone understand, this is a linear project, so it cannot afford to have any breaks, over about 1,000 kilometers. And we've asked Alto to find the straightest possible line between Quebec City and Toronto, while stopping in a number of other communities. So that corridor, or that alignment, will be 60 meters wide. So what does that mean? It means that we can be very reassuring to landowners, to farmers, to others right now that we'll follow some principles. There will, of course, be exceptions, but we're going to try and avoid cutting fields in two, cutting farms in two. Where there are rural roads or accesses or wildlife passages or livestock passages, we will try and make, well, not try, we will make provisions for those things. And we will try and follow the ends of lots to the extent that that is possible. And that is only after we've exhausted what public right-of-way possibilities there also may be. Energy corridors, highways, etc., other public lands. So I'm hoping that as Alto goes through the consultations, which was partly also your question, they have already consulted. I think I mentioned how many engagements they've had in my remarks. They've been to communities big and small along these identified corridors. That work continues. They were supposed to be in Gatineau today. Unfortunately, they postponed due to the weather. But it will tell you, Gatineau is not exactly on the map, but on the route map. Ottawa is, but we will be consulting with communities, adjacent communities, rural communities, and others. To your final observation, which is what can rural residents see in this project? They, I believe, will see what all Canadians see, which is a project on the scale of the St. Lawrence Seaway, on the scale of some of the great infrastructure projects that we've managed to undertake as a country. And they can imagine they or their children, like they get to an airport today, getting to an Alto station and using that as tourists, as business people, as students, as people who are curious about this mode of transportation. And the benefits will accrue to them in the same way other modes of transportation benefits accrue to them today.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Senator Ross.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Ross.
Welcome, Minister. Glad you're with us tonight. You won't be surprised to know that my question relates to business and supporting industry and Canadian suppliers. I know that you mentioned in Transport Committee recently in the other place that Alto has launched a process with Canadian steel producers, and your words were to see what we can do about using rail steel from here, and given that it isn't made in Canada anymore. So are you confident this can be accomplished? And also this evening, in your opening remarks, you mentioned the Buy Canadian policy. Are there other components of the project that currently aren't made in Canada that you and Alto are working with to try and pivot and source here at home?
Yeah, and thank you for that question. Look, we are acutely aware that this project needs to maximize Canadian content, labor, engineering, obviously materials, and technology. The dilemma, of course, is that we don't manufacture high-speed locomotives in Canada. And much to my chagrin, I did not know this before becoming Transport Minister, we no longer manufacture rail steel in Canada. So most reasonable people would say, well, we're going to use a lot of that. Let's make some rail steel again in this country. Apparently not so easy. But what I've asked Alto to do is to consult with the steel industry to understand exactly what it would take to maximize the use of Canadian engineering, materials, and so on in the manufacture of steel products. Now, not all of the steel, in fact, maybe not even most of the steel for this project will be rail steel, rail-grade steel, certified rail-grade steel. And so we will apply the provisions of Buy Canada to obviously the entirety of the project. But we've really zeroed in on steel because it is such an important component and such an important material in the construction of this project. And I can tell you that to the extent that it is possible, every bit of iron ore, every bit of Canadian ingenuity, smelting, whatever, is going to be, or pouring, is going to be Canadian.
Thank you for that. You mentioned in your opening remarks $35 billion impact to the economy. Can you give me a sense of how that breaks down?
Yeah, a rough order of magnitude, but there are a whole bunch of inputs that would go into that, Senator. There are major efficiency gains. There are major productivity gains. The construction and operation of the infrastructure itself will itself generate massive economic activity. The real estate activity around stations that will be generated. So this will have one-time benefits involved in construction. It will have ongoing benefits in other infrastructure that will follow this construction, and obviously in terms of the operation and the productivity gains made by Canadians. I mean, I actually think this number might significantly undershoot it if you also consider avoiding road construction, for example, and other expenditures that future governments would have to consider were we not to do this project.
And do I still have time?
Une minute.
The 50,000 jobs that you mentioned in your opening remarks, how many of those jobs would be ones that would be sort of one-time part of the construction, and how many would be ongoing?
Most of those jobs would be construction jobs. The operation of the infrastructure, I mean, it will require thousands of people. I don't obviously have the number, but it is substantially weighted towards construction.
Okay, thank you
Merci
very much.
beaucoup.
Thank you.
Sénatrice Hébert.
Senator Hebert, thank you. Honourable Chair and Honourable Minister, welcome. We have heard a good deal about Alto so far, and I think this is a project that we, or at least certainly I, fully support. You have mentioned the delays. We have been champions of delays, but not on the right side of the equation here in Canada. So I'm happy to hear you address this issue. The budget also allowed for a fund to diversify commercial corridors. The Prime Minister has announced an objective of doubling our exports, other than to the United States, within the coming years, some $7 billion for diversifying those corridors, ports and rail and so on, to get our goods out. So where are we on those projects? Because they are critical for where things will go. I have announced last week to the Prospectors and Developers Association in Toronto, and so last week we sent out invitation letters to a number of projects, important ones across the country, including provinces and territories, and I would add as well the fund for the Arctic, which adds another billion to the 5 billion. The best way to describe what types of projects I've announced and are being announced is that they are impactful projects. There is a great deal of need in our supply chains and in our transportation system, ports, railways, intermodal terminals, which are key to keeping the system running fluidly, logistics and so on, and transportation across the country. So we're aware of a number of projects, and we're opening the door proactively to submissions. That's the first phase. Secondly, there will be an open invitation going out for projects. And thirdly, we will be working on slightly smaller projects, but that have considerable impact, that break bottlenecks, and small projects that will really make a big difference in making us more efficient. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there were some projects that had already been planned. There were already some undertakings on the government's part, Contrecoeur, for example, or others. Am I wrong here? There was a prior program, the commercial corridors, and Contrecoeur received a sum, not the majority of the largest amount, but a certain amount to finance that project. There are a number of partners who contribute to a financing any project, and the funds in the diversification fund should be used as a lever, really, to encourage participation in financing. We will not be funding things from top to bottom, through and through. There will be provinces and municipalities and private companies, railways, and port companies, and the infrastructure bank, and perhaps other funds as well. Perhaps dual-use defense investments. The Department of Defense may find certain infrastructures of use to them. So each project will be put together, financed in its own way with its own set of partners to round out the funding, but all in this accelerated process that the government is setting up. Am I right? We are asking those who are proponents of projects to sort of give us an idea of where else they would get funding. Just to ensure that I get this clearly, because of the question about Contrecoeur, I'm uncertain that I've clearly understood. So given that we are in public, I'd like to make sure I really get this right. The part you're talking about, the Contrecoeur port, is 2.4 billion, not within the 5 billion that you've announced, right? I just want to be clear. We've got things, that people won't be shocked in Montreal hearing this. It's somewhat funded by the prior program preceding this current fund, but of course the port companies have their own ability to borrow. Perhaps just adding to that, I understand, though, that the projects to be covered by the new fund will be using this accelerated process, right? Yes. Thank you, Senator Gignac. Thank you and welcome, Minister. Thank you for joining us. As you have mentioned, the high-speed rail project is surely the largest and most complex project that our generation will see, and I don't doubt that it will be transformative for Quebec and Ontario as the St. Lawrence Seaway was for the east of the country. In fact, a prior minister of covering these matters, Charest at the time in Ontario, and I in Quebec pushed to get a high-speed rail project underway, and now it's finally coming to fruition. So my question, could we get a little more accounting, more figures. Senator Ross has mentioned economic fallout and benefits. We can't evaluate this based on population density, the number of people who will be taking the train. But look, would you be open to having the Parliamentary Budget Officer help us, we parliamentarians, examine this in greater detail? Because we're in solution mode, aiming to support you, but we fear that there's a lot of disinformation circulating in public and that people aren't examining this matter as they should. At Confederation in 1867 and beyond that, of course, there was the railway put in to link the country east to west, and I think that, people are saying 60, 90 billion. I think we're going to be higher than that, 60-something billion, given how this seems to have cost other governments elsewhere, but I'm not an expert. But look, are you in agreement? Could we have the Parliamentary Budget Officer help us out with this? All right. Here's my answer, Senator Gignac. I think that Canada, the entirety of Canada, must decide to go ahead with this project, and that means that we must be transparent, and transparency must be seen to be offered throughout the conception of this project. Sometimes in Canada, we burn through stages of a project, and you have just done so with due respect, sir, I say, by suggesting that it will cost a good deal more. And perhaps not. I am determined to ensure that we spend as little as possible, and that we certainly don't spend as much as you're suggesting. But I think it's also important, and you alluded to this, to say that it is a transformation, that we are actually offering ourselves a new way of living in Canada, a corridor that covers about 40% of the population of our country. We can imagine like a new use, a new vocation, a new beginning for many cities, such as Three Rivers. You could wake up in Three Rivers and go to work in Quebec City. You could wake up in Peterborough and spend your day working in Toronto. Young couples could easily travel. And discussing this with the Spanish minister, I've spoken a great deal with him about high-speed rail, and he's told me about how transformative it has been across Spain, small towns, larger towns that thought they were dying, and now they have developed new knowledge centers, and it's become very in. We can give ourselves that. It's not the Minister of Transport's decision. It's not even the government's decision. It's not even the Parliament's decision. It's a choice to be made by Canadians. And we, at least my responsibility and yours as well, is to work with people as they make this decision, the decision that they must take to go ahead and to break ground. I can speak to this because twice I've been, on train from Malaga to Madrid, and it's really interesting to be able to use that high-speed rail in Spain. 30 seconds left. All right. Here, I have a suggestion. I support whether it be 125 billion, as I suggested, or 60 to 90 billion, as you suggest. Look, that's not going to keep me awake at night. But look, tossing around figures, I'm afraid that don't know quite what we're saying, and we're going to be in damage control very quickly. And the faster we turn to the nonpartisan, independent parliamentary budget officer, because we really need to avoid disinformation. So, as an aside, I really do suggest that we need tools, we need nonpartisan evaluations to help us think this through. Thank you. The Parliamentary Budget Officer, I think, is available to you, Senator Gignac. We have already put the question to him. Very well. So you'd like to make sure the train doesn't go off track. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Duwals, A number of communities will be affected by this project. Could you tell us a bit more about collaboration with them? What role do they have in making this decision in the land management and all the aspects of the project that will affect them? Alto, as I have just indicated, is involved in a process, one of their many consultation, co-creation, collaboration processes. And this one involves going out in the field, announcing the corridor, as we said, 10 kilometers wide. And the aim of this undertaking that they've just gotten underway is to better understand who is out there, meet the farmers who hope that their land, their fields won't be cut in half. And so they're multiplying these sessions. And for those listening to us, I certainly hope that they will have had a chance, should they so wish, to visit, attend one of these open door sessions and to share their other. There is a website available for information on this, and there will be other consultation processes that will be undertaken in future, all to ensure that they have a deep understanding of the land, the real stories of people who've been living there generation to generation on those lands, and to really have a feel for the terrain, the land. Thank you for your answer. But when will the government make the final corridor route public? And in line with questions that have been put, you say that the planning is based on tried and true processes, the best processes used in Canada and elsewhere. But what sort of framework has been set in to avoid speculation, rising costs, and overall, how can we ensure that it will not cost a good deal more, twice as much? A short answer to your question. Once this bill receives royal assent, because, one of the critical steps is land acquisition, so optimizing this period and this step is essential to success, to shorten the planning phase and thus reduce costs of that and of construction, about $5 billion in savings for each year that we can avoid dragging on the planning before we get to construction. But the financial oversight and construction oversight and all that, don't forget that we do have partners in the private sector, Cadence Consortium, the Caisse de Dépôt. We have French partners, people who have actually set in high-speed rail, SNCF and so on, and Air Canada is a member of our consortium. We have people who are motivated to ensure that cost overrides do not occur and that the budget is respected. Thank you. I hope we can remain optimistic and make this a reality. Thank you, Senator Lafreda. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Minister, to our Finance Committee. So Alto will act as the project authority for what has been described as Canada's largest infrastructure project. My question is on accountability of Alto, governance safeguards, and risk management. What governance safeguards will ensure that Alto remains fully accountable to Parliament, and particularly with respect to procurement decisions, financing arrangements, long-term operating costs? We've talked about the PBO and the Auditor General. We obviously could mandate the PBO. And with respect to forecast risk, passenger projections suggest that the network could reach 10 million trips per year by 2050. Could you explain those assumptions, those underlying forecasts, or maybe send them to us if you can, share them, and what financial exposure the government would face if demand falls significantly below those projections? where's our, my previous role as a banker, we always, manage the risks and the mitigating factors.
We appreciate that, and we'll be leaning into that expertise, Senator, as we go through this. Some of this you may be aware of. Alto is currently structured as a subsidiary of Via Rail. Although it's generally treated as a parent Crown Corporation for the purposes of the Financial Administration Act, so that general governance framework exists. We have a highly qualified, highly motivated, highly respected board of directors who guides the management of the corporation. And then we have the same oversight regime, one that you would have access to as a member of this committee, or indeed as a member of the Senate. It submits its own corporate plan and operating budgets to the minister for the approval of the Governor and Council on the recommendation of the minister. Alto is accountable to Parliament through me, the Minister of Transport, who is responsible for ensuring Parliament receives transparent and timely reporting on Alto's activities, spending, and performance, including tabling the summary of the corporate plan and operating budget and full annual report with Parliament. Treasury Board also makes public quarterly financial reports on the business and activities of all parent Crown corporations. So, as you can see, we have a fairly high, multifaceted and multi-opportunity transparency and governance framework where the Senate Finance Committee, the Senate Transportation Committee, other entities of Parliament can check in at any number of times on the evolution of the project.
Excellent. With respect to the projections, I mean, we're used to having pessimistic projections, optimistic projections, and realistic projections. With respect to those projections by 2050, where do they stand? Is there a risk to the taxpayer to monetize or not monetize the project? And Canada's forward. I do like. The Canadians do support the project. I'm not saying they don't. And you did mention le choix d'un peuple, transparence évidente.
A people's choice and transparency.
We really look at those numbers to dive in. If I were to approve a project, I'd like to dive into those projections and see how realistic, what hypotheses you've made, and where we're going with all that.
All of that's very reasonable, Senator. I think you'll have the opportunity. That's not what we're asking you to do today, however. What I would argue we're asking you to do today is to approve a land acquisition model that we know will reduce risk, and we know will reduce timeframes, and hence reduce expenditures, taxpayer expenditures. With respect to projections, whether it be passenger projections or cost projections, operating model projections, obviously that's the work that's going on right now. But what I can tell you is we do have private partners. And while we haven't yet settled on an operating model with those private partners or with other entities that may become involved in the future, there will have to be built-in incentives to make sure this project has ridership, is a success, and generates the revenue that it will ultimately be forecasted to generate.
No time, eh?
No time.
Second round if possible.
Parfait, Senator Galvez.
Very well, Senator Galvez. Thank you, Minister, for being with us and for answering our questions. I, too, am very interested in the financial setup of this major project. We have received Alto here, and Alto explained to us many of the aspects of its approach.
Billions to be used over 6 years for the land acquisition. Okay, but mainly land acquisition. But we know that the project, the total cost, is estimated between 60 and 90 billion. And you're saying that these have public and private So what is the proportion of the public and the private?
We have not established that. We have a private consortium that is assisting in the development of the project, alongside the employees of the Crown Corporation that I just
Final montage will be established.
It will be an evolution, Senator, as we make decisions on routing, make land acquisition decisions, make decisions. You heard me talk about the options between Ottawa and Peterborough, make decisions about how we enter cities, for example.
Air Canada, la Caisse de dépôt, la SNCF, la France. I hope Bombardier is there. I hope Hydro-Quebec is there too. What is the risk that they will assume when this montage financier will settle?
That is all to be determined by what will be extensive contract negotiations, Senator.
So if none of this is yet...
Hydro-Quebec, I can assure you, will be a key supplier.
And if you're lucky, they will sell it to 4 cents the kilowatt, but we don't know that. But
I will tell them you said that.
yeah, tell them. Yeah. So because of this, and the worry of my colleague Senator Lofreda is how Parliament will be informed about these very crucial steps, because we don't want to have to own land and not to have all the partners and all the money to construct.
Very good question. I don't think you want me to repeat my answer to Senator Lofreda, but what I will say is that all parliamentary oversight opportunities exist for this project. It is a public-private partnership, but emphasis for our purposes on public. This is a Crown Corporation. It is the shareholders of this corporation are the people of Canada.
One last question. How you will be ensured, or what type of penalty will contractors suffer if they fail not to finish something on the timeline? Because, as you said, timeline is, we don't want to disappoint everybody that is waiting.
We will be negotiating a painstaking number of construction, operating, and other agreements to support this project. And I'm sure that the feedback that you've just given us, that there ought to be risk sharing, which I think is essentially what you're suggesting, be a feature of those agreements.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you very much, Minister. I have a couple of questions. You have said that it is a people's choice. The nation will decide. So let's involve the people. The people who will be most affected, being those having land where the routing will pass, and we've heard information about this. Mostly, though, that we wanted this to go quickly and not cost too much. So, of course, this will involve farming land, because it'll be faster to expropriate that. There won't be any buildings in the way and so on. That'll be fast and cheap. So the priority is to expropriate farming land. On the other hand, you are preventing people from having recourse to express themselves and to really be involved, because the people, that's them too. And specifically, I'm speaking to recourse to the Transport Office, because right now the C-15 withdraws that recourse such that the only person making the decisions is you and Alto, which is your agency, so to speak. So the people aren't making many decisions, are they? So why are you withdrawing that possibility of turning to the Transport Office so that things go faster and cost less? At the outset, I will underscore that it takes two ministers. Well, I say you, I mean the government. And the Expropriations Act, of course, the person in charge of that is also involved in the process. But look, let me say, and I wasn't there when the Expropriation Act was drawn up, but I imagine that there it was not a matter of projects involving thousands of individual landowners and imposing the envisaged process in the current Expropriation Act would make the process much longer, even beyond 8 years. I submit that. I don't want to cut you off, Mr. Minister. I've understood that. I think you have ensured that the Act be shifted or improved so that things can go faster. All right, but you said that you would negotiate first, but you have withdrawn the need to negotiate as a condition of expropriation. That's a bit contradictory, but my issue is the Office of Transportation Agency, and because its mandate is to authorize railway construction, it has, wonderful criteria about the need for the service, the effect on communities, the economy of transportation, the environmental impact, and then with the jurisprudence, I've looked at that. You could also break down all of those criteria. So why withdraw that recourse? The government, Senator, was elected, among other reasons, and it was explicitly stated in our platform that we would move forward on major projects to build the country in a far more effective manner. I have been elected 4 times in Gatineau, and basically the conversation has been about a tramway, and that over a decade, and we're no further advanced on that project than when I was first elected in 2015. We have an issue in Canada. We question, we re-question, we add processes. We pile them on, but we don't move ahead. Some jurisdictions have brought projects to fruition. I mentioned Quebec with the REM, high-speed rail, Ontario with some public transport projects. Nothing is perfect, of course. No one's maintaining that everything's perfect, but what they were able to do was accelerate the process. In Quebec, which we have tried to imitate, by the way, they included people who had already done such things, and that's what we have with our consortia named Cadence. I can look at a landowner in the eyes and a firm can state that they will have a negotiation, there will be a negotiation phase, and if we cannot come to an agreement, and we have calculated all those costs, the negotiations, the legal costs, then we would move to expropriation. An expropriation would involve a notice, and that landowner could then appeal to the second minister, whom I alluded to earlier, to contest, to question. I submit that this is quite exhaustive as a process, quite in-depth. As for the agency, the government has decided, the Parliament, at least the House of Commons, has decided that this project is for the general good of Canada. And our great projects in Canada, many of them at least, have been of that nature, and I submit that this is one of those. Senator Papatello.
And thanks for all your hard work, and especially those of your colleagues here tonight, because I know this has been a big topic at this committee and at other committees, but I was really pleased that you address it head on. My own experience in expropriations, of course, was with bringing the 401 through the middle of my riding to arrive at the new bridge that is about to open, the Gordie Howe Bridge. The Gordie Howe Bridge, but the Herb Gray Parkway, right, which was a massive swath of land, and having to go door to door, knock on the door and say, we're going to need this house space. And it was very difficult. But I was really happy to see when it was over, people, you know, there was always going to be some, of course, but the majority of people felt that they were dealt with fairly. And I really would appreciate that commitment that this government's going to be fair to people, because this is their lives, their livelihood, where they live. It's the biggest investment they make in their lives, and I think it's important that we treat them fairly. Senator Black was asking questions as the chair of agriculture, a big focus on farmers, because they feel that the rural community will suffer more than the urban who benefit from the high-speed rail, but it's at their cost. And if you could just take a moment to address that. A second point I want to make very quickly, the first time we started talking about high-speed rail was in 1982, and it was the mayor of Windsor who started it as the Windsor-Quebec City corridor. And he's still alive today, and I want him to hear you say that it will actually get to Windsor, even, you know, respecting with the reports that we did in our times past. I know it's not right now seen as the one that's going to generate the most revenue initially, but I do believe that as you keep adding those legs, those communities are going to benefit, and it's going to create demand, and it will create GDP growth for the country. So I hope that you could express Windsor, Quebec City just as much as you talk about Toronto, Montreal. Is that a deal?
So let me take that one first. I had a boss, his name was Paul Martin, who used to talk about getting high-speed rail to Windsor as well. So you can bet. And Herb Gray probably did too. And thank you for naming that parkway after him. And the Gordie Howe Bridge, in fact, is another great collective decision that we as Canadians made. And yes, we do ask a lot of residents. You talked about those who were affected by the roadway. I was involved in building the Confederation Bridge to Prince Edward Island. There were land acquisition, some, not a lot, but some land acquisition issues there, environmental concerns. All of these projects have a common theme. It's easy to ask 100 questions, and all of those questions need to be asked and require answers. What we have to adopt, just like we must adopt with all of the landowners who will be along the alignment, is respect, patience. We have to explain ourselves. We have to make sure people have all of the answers that, to the questions that they're asking. And we also need to make this project real and believable for people. That means explaining the benefits. We have a duty to explain the considerable benefits that will accrue to communities all along the line. And remember that you will never be far from that far from a station. Think of people who travel to airports now. Well, many of those people will change to traveling to an Alto station so that they can access this infrastructure and go somewhere else along that route. But I understand that, you know, linear projects of all kinds have people who are concerned at the outset and will require the kinds of answers that we will need to provide as we go through the process. So Windsor is absolutely still in the vision. Call it phase 2. The train needs to get to Toronto, and then I believe that we will immediately, maybe even before we open this first phase, begin planning the second phase, which would be a logical extension through southwestern Ontario to Windsor.
There's 30 seconds. There were.
No times. And we are 5 or 6 minutes over. Donc, je pense qu'on va devoir arrêter là.
So I think we will have to stop here. Honourable Minister, we truly appreciate your having come before us and your sharing your testimony. We will surely have a chance to invite you to join us again, and I'm convinced that you will accept our invitation with joy. So we must free you now. I see that a bell is ringing, but it's only to call us back for 8 o'clock this evening. It's not a vote. No, there's no vote underway. So we will suspend now for a couple of minutes to set in our second panel. Thank you.